I came into this volume expecting to write the previous one again. The last volume in this series audited Thailand and issued only the second unconditional yes in 16 volumes. And Indonesia looked like the same argument with different proper nouns: a giant population, an uncapped interchange pool, a flag carrier already sitting on HeyMax's shelf, treaty signed, a sign-up gate that costs almost nothing to open. On that reading, Indonesia is the cheapest activation on the map. The research would not support it, and the places where it broke are worth naming before anything else, because each one is a load-bearing beam in the Thai argument that simply is not present here. This is an independent analysis of whether HeyMax, the Singapore rewards platform this series has examined across 16 volumes, should enter Indonesia. Researched in August 2026 from public sources. Nobody paid for it, nobody previewed it, and nothing in it is financial advice. Beam 1, Thailand's central finding was that Thai bank points ladder into Royal Orchid Plus and essentially nothing else. No breadth, no optionality, a vacancy shaped exactly like the entrant. That is not true in Indonesia. Indonesian bank points already convert into KrisFlyer, into HeyMax, and into GarudaMiles from mainstream cards as ordinary everyday practice. The gap here is real, but it is much narrower. Nobody aggregates them, the ratios are poor, the monthly caps are hard, and earning is confined to card spend. That is a convenience and rate argument. It is not a possibility argument, and those two things sell at very different prices. Beam 2, Thailand's anchor is a restructured program in rebuild mode. Hungry, expanding partners, one negotiation away from a treaty. Indonesia's anchor is already signed, and it is moving the wrong way. Garuda was recapitalized by Danantara, the sovereign asset fund, to the tune of roughly $1.33 billion. And GarudaMiles changed its award chart 4 times in 12 months, including a temporary chart that raised some domestic redemptions by between 500 and 1100%. Beam 3, Thailand's pool is uncapped, with a formed mass card tier and a 5-year runway. Indonesia's card interchange is also uncapped and richer per swipe. But Bank Indonesia has done something no other regulator on this atlas has done. It left card interchange completely alone, and it made the alternative free. QRIS at 0.3% and 0 below 500,000 rupiah, which covers most Indonesian retail by transaction count. The pool is not capped. It is being outcompeted by a public utility. And card penetration sits at 6 to 7%, the lowest in the region. Beam 4, Thailand's community sits at the last window where a platform can earn standing rather than buy it. Indonesia's community is past that window and considerably less happy. Pinterpoint, the country's leading points publication, spent its 2026 strategy piece calling the domestic market a roller coaster, telling readers GarudaMiles had devalued, and recommending they go and get American credit cards instead. It does not mention HeyMax at all. One correction belongs here rather than buried in a later chapter. I came into this volume believing HeyMax's Indonesian sign-up gate had been open since inception, which would make this a market already entered and merely never activated. The company's own series, A Communication, describes 2 operating markets, Singapore and Hong Kong. It names Japan, Taiwan, and Australia for expansion. Indonesia is not mentioned. An unlocked door is not an entry, so the question here is the ordinary one, not a question about activation. The verdict stated now because this series states verdicts early. No on entry. Yes on the wedge. There is exactly one genuinely unfilled vacancy in Indonesia, Portal Earn, sitting on the richest affiliate commission. This analysis has priced anywhere on Earth, and building it does not require entering the country at all. 13 chapters, let's begin. Chapter 1, the Archipelago's demand. Indonesia is the largest market this series has examined in Southeast Asia, and on the demand side, it is the easiest to get wrong, because the headline number and the addressable number differ by more than an order of magnitude. Let me start with the part that already pays, because it is unambiguous. Jakarta to Singapore and Bali to Singapore rank among Southeast Asia's busiest international routes. And capacity is still being added. Trans-Nusa went to 3 daily Jakarta-Singapore rotations from April 2026 and added a second daily Bali-Singapore frequency from May. Kuala Lumpur to Jakarta is dense behind them. For HeyMax, that is the same structure the Thailand volume documented, at comparable weight. Bali is the regional holiday default for the platform's existing Singapore and Hong Kong members. Every villa booking, every Klook activity, every airport transfer already monetizes through the travel floor at the vertical's invariant 10 to 25%. So Indonesian demand, seen from HeyMax's side of the corridor, is not a growth thesis. It is current revenue. The outbound side is real and growing too. Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, and Korea, roughly in that order. And outbound growth is what mints the aspiration that Miles exists to serve. But here Indonesia's geography does something Thailand's did not, and it cuts against the entry. Domestic Indonesian air travel is cheap and abundant. Jakarta to Bali runs a few $100,000 return across 4 carriers, call it $40 to $100, which means a currency's domestic redemptions are worth very little, and the aspirational redemption has to be international. That puts more weight on the non-Garuda shelf here than the Thai case put on the non-Royal Orchid shelf. Chapter 4 will return to that, because the anchor is in worse shape than Thailand's. And now the number that actually matters. This is where the discipline of this series earns its keep. Indonesia has roughly 280 million people. The Miles game addresses almost none of them. Credit card penetration is 6 to 7% of the population. That is the lowest in Southeast Asia. And it is not an accident of development. Bank Indonesia's eligibility thresholds on income and credit history are deliberately strict. Card transactions run above 40 million a month at above 35 trillion rupiah. That is a real economy. But it is a Jakarta and Surabaya economy, sitting on top of a country that pays by scanning a QR code. So here is the honest demand statement, and I want it stated plainly because almost every slide written about this market gets it wrong in the same direction. Indonesia's addressable tier is not the 4th most populous nation on Earth. It is an affluent metropolitan class of perhaps a few million people. And within that, the genuine optimizer cohort, the ones holding a Singapore Airlines co-brand, reading valuation tables, thinking in cents per mile, numbers in the low hundreds of thousands at the most. That is the same order of magnitude as Thailand's beachhead, arrived at from a population 4 times the size. Which is not a reason to dismiss the market. It is a reason to price it correctly and to distrust every projection that multiplies the population by anything at all. The demand is real. It points at a shelf HeyMax already holds, and it is much smaller than it looks. The money underneath it is next, and that is where Indonesia diverges from Thailand hardest. Chapter 2, the pool and the free rail beneath it. Every volume in this series has an interchange chapter, because interchange is where rewards money comes from. Indonesia's is the strangest one I have had to write, because the regulator here has done something no other jurisdiction on this atlas has done. It left card interchange alone, and it made the alternative free. The card pool first. Indonesia imposes no statutory cap on consumer credit interchange, and merchant discount rates on card transactions run at an estimated 1.5% to 3%. Commercial figures, labeled estimates, because unregulated markets publish nothing. By the Atlas's 4-regime taxonomy, that is an open pool, and per swipe it is genuinely rich. Richer than Thailand's estimated 1.6 to 2.5 band, several times Malaysia's capped ceiling, and an order of magnitude above what Australia's reformed market will permit from July 2026. Now the rail. QRIS is the national QR standard that Bank Indonesia mandated across every provider, collapsing the country's fragmented proprietary codes into a single system. It carries a merchant discount rate of 0.3% for standard transactions. And from December 2024, Bank Indonesia waived the merchant discount rate entirely for QRIS transactions below 500,000 rupiah. That is roughly $30, and it therefore covers the overwhelming majority of Indonesian retail by transaction count. Now sit with the mechanism, because it is not the Australian one, and this series should not file it there. Australia capped the pool. The regulator reached into card interchange, cut it to 0.3%, banned surcharging, and the rewards economy died because its funding was legislated away. That is destruction by statute. Indonesia has done nothing whatsoever to card interchange. It built a parallel rail. It mandated acceptance of that rail. It priced the rail at zero below the threshold where most transactions actually live. And then it let merchants and consumers decide. The card pool is not capped. It is being outcompeted by a free public utility. The end state may well be the same, but the path is completely different, and the difference matters enormously to an entrant, because a capped pool is permanently poor, whereas an outcompeted pool merely shrinks toward the segment where cards still win. High ticket, international, credit financed, corporate. And that segment is exactly where the affluent tier from Chapter 1 spends. It is also the segment QRIS's free tier does not touch. So the pool's true shape is not a broad, shallow lake. It is a narrow column of rich transactions. Card penetration at 6 to 7% is the width. 1.5 to 3% merchant discount is the depth. Indonesia never formed the mass card habit that Thailand's 5-year runway assumes is currently being consumed, which is, perversely, a kind of stability. There is less left to lose. Nobody was ever going to buy a business class fare or a Marriott stay by scanning a code for under $30. And now the counterweight, which is serious. Indonesia's commission economy is the richest this series has priced anywhere on Earth. Shopee affiliate commissions run 4.25 to 10%. Tokopedia runs roughly 7 to 10. TikTok Shop typically runs 5 to 15, with open plan listings reaching 10 to 30, restructured in May 2026 from a flat rate into tiers keyed on a creator's trailing 30-day volume. A platform whose funding comes from commerce commissions rather than from interchange is far less exposed to the QRIS question than any bank co-brand is. That is the postcard architecture the Brazil Almanac described. And Indonesia is the first market where it looks like the primary funding route rather than the succession plan. One caveat before that gets overclaimed. TikTok's tiering rewards scale, so a small Indonesian operation earns at the bottom of the published band, not the top. Model the floor. The pool priced, open but narrow, undercut rather than capped, stable in the segment that matters, and backed by a commission economy rich enough to fund the product on its own. That last clause is the most important sentence in this volume's arithmetic. Chapter 8 tests whether it survives contact with the numbers. Chapter 3, the incumbents and the finding that breaks the template. I want to be honest about how this chapter was written, because the process is the finding. I came into it expecting to write the Thailand incumbents chapter again with different proper nouns. Closed-loop giants, no travel exits, a vacancy shaped like the entrant. The research would not let me, and the reason is the most important structural fact in this entire analysis. Start with the map, which does look familiar. Indonesia's loyalty field is fragmented and coalition curious. The market reports name coalition adoption as the transforming trend, and the field itself is the usual census. Telkomsel Poin runs the telco's enormous subscriber base. Alfamart's Poinku and AlphaGift, with PT Global Loyalty Indonesia running the CRM behind them, turn convenience store visits into a mobile-first loop, and Indomaret does the same thing on the other side of the street. The marketplaces run coin economies: Tokopedia, Shopee, Bukalapak. The wallets run their own: GoPay, OVO, DANA. Every one of them is a closed loop that redeems into discounts. And on the Thai template, That is where this chapter would conclude. Giants without travel exits. A vacancy waiting for somebody holding airline treaties. Then you look at the banks, and the template breaks. Indonesian bank points already transfer into multiple foreign airline programs, from mainstream cards, as a matter of ordinary practice. BCA's reward BCA converts into KrisFlyer. Mandiri's Livenpoint converts into KrisFlyer from World Elite, Signature, Platinum, and other tiers. UOB converts 50,000 of its points into 5,000 KrisFlyer miles. Asia Miles is reachable from several issuers. GarudaMiles is reachable from most of them. Conversion takes 2 to 3 business days for the foreign programs, and it is faster for the domestic one. Now compare that to the Thailand finding, which was the load-bearing beam of that entire volume. Thai bank ladders reach Royal Orchid Plus and essentially nothing else. A Thai optimizer's ceiling is one good co-brand into one program. That was the vacancy. It is not the situation here. An Indonesian holding a BCA or Mandiri or UOB card can already choose between the Singapore currency, the Hong Kong currency, and the national one. So the Indonesian gap is real, but it is narrower, and naming it precisely is the difference between an honest analysis and a pitch. There is no aggregated consumer-facing currency. Nobody sells one balance that reaches everything. The ratios are poor, and crucially, they are capped. Mandiri limits conversion to 50,000 Livenpoint a month, which is a hard ceiling on how much value a member can actually move. The generic points path has been devaluing. BCA's regular reward conversion into KrisFlyer went from 150 to 1 to 200 to 1. And earn is confined to card spend, because a bank can only pay you for transactions that cross its own rails. That last clause is where HeyMax's real argument lives, and it is a different argument from the Thai one. In Thailand, the pitch was breadth, to a market that had none. In Indonesia, the pitch has to be stacking. Earn on portal, spend on top of whatever the card already pays. Plus 1-to-1 against a 200-to-1 generic path. Plus reach beyond the 3 programs the banks happen to serve. Now I want to be exact about the rate comparison, because this is the easiest place in this whole series to mislead by omission. A BCA Singapore Airlines co-brand earns 1 KrisFlyer mile per 10,000 rupiah of spend. The PPS Club Infinite earns 1 per 5,000. Converted honestly, that is not a bad rate. It is roughly what a Singaporean co-brand pays. HeyMax's roughly 1 mile per dollar class does not beat it head-to-head, and no chapter of this volume will claim otherwise. It does not have to, because the two earn on completely different transactions. They add, they do not compete. But an analysis that quietly compared its own portal rate against a bank's card rate, as though the member had to choose between them, would be doing arithmetic dishonestly. This series has spent 15 volumes refusing to do that, and it is not going to start now. So, the incumbents, closed-loop coalitions with no travel exits, exactly as in Thailand. And above them, a bank layer that has already solved, partially and badly, the problem HeyMax exists to solve completely. That is a weaker vacancy than Thailand's and a stronger one than the United States. Where exactly it lands is the gap hunt's job, and the gap hunt is going to have a much harder time here than it did one market north. Chapter 4. The Anchor, Rescued, and Repricing. Every market volume in this series has an anchor chapter, because the flag carrier's program decides whether an entry has an aspirational core at all. Thailand's anchor chapter found a program in rebuild mode. Restructured, revenue-hungry, shipping monetization products, and by every signal this series tracks, one negotiation away from a treaty. Indonesia's anchor is the inverse on almost every line. And the divergence is worth stating in full, because it is the strongest single argument against this market. Garuda Indonesia is being rescued by the state. In November 2025, Danantara, Indonesia's sovereign asset fund, injected 23.67 trillion rupiah. 17.02 trillion in cash, and 6.65 trillion converted from debt. Roughly $1.33 billion US. And the allocation tells you exactly what kind of rescue it is. About 37% went to Garuda's aircraft maintenance. About 63% went to funding the operations of its low-cost subsidiary, Citylink. That is not growth capital. That is money to get grounded airplanes back into the air. The turnaround has a plan and a scoreboard. The chief executive is running 11 operational transformation initiatives, targeting at least 68 serviceable Garuda aircraft and 50 Citylink aircraft by the end of 2026, with a strategy built on route optimization, revenue management, and digitalization. Danantara expects a return to profitability in 2026. The first quarter delivered a 45% narrowing of losses as traffic and frequency recovered. That is genuine progress, and I am not going to write it down. But it is early recovery, not recovery. Independent aviation coverage in March 2026 was still describing a financial tailspin, and a carrier whose fleet availability is a stated annual target is a carrier whose network is a work in progress. A loyalty program sits downstream of a network. Now the part that matters most, because members experience programs, not balance sheets. GarudaMiles spent 2026 repricing, hard and repeatedly. A temporary award chart ran from the 1st of January to the 31st of March. On some domestic redemptions, it raised prices by between 500 and 1,100%. Read that again, because the magnitude is not a typo, and it is not something this series has encountered anywhere else at that scale. On the 1st of April, a new permanent chart replaced it, with moderate increases over the pre-January levels. So the permanent damage is very much smaller than that temporary spike, and an analyst quoting only the spike would be misrepresenting the outcome. I want that on the record. Then Flexi Award arrived on the 29th of April, framed as improving award availability. Redemption nominee follows on the 1st of October. 4 program changes in a single year, one of them briefly catastrophic. And the Indonesian community noticed. Pinter Poin, the country's leading points publication, names GarudaMiles in its domestic top 3 and simultaneously tells readers it has devalued and that they should diversify into ANA, JAL, and Flying Blue. So what does this do to the entry thesis? Something specific, and it is not fatal. HeyMax already holds a Garuda treaty. It is carried on the shelf, unlike Royal Orchid Plus, which Thailand would have to go and win. So Indonesia inverts Thailand's central problem. There is no anchor negotiation to gate the entry on, because the anchor is already signed. That is genuinely valuable, and it is exactly why the pool Atlas called Indonesia a cheap activation. But the value of a treaty is the value of what it delivers. And what this one delivers is a one-to-one into a currency that repriced 4 times in 12 months, while its parent was being recapitalized by a sovereign fund. The aspirational core is depreciating underneath the shelf. A member who transfers today is buying into a chart with a demonstrated willingness to move. 2 consequences follow, and both shape the plan. First, the non-Garuda shelf has to carry more weight here than the non-Royal Orchid shelf carried in Thailand. Chapter 1 established that domestic Indonesian redemptions are worth little because domestic fares are cheap. Chapter 3 established that Indonesian optimizers already reach KrisFlyer and Asia miles through their banks. So HeyMax's Indonesian pitch cannot lead with Garuda. It has to lead with the 20-plus programs the banks do not reach, with Garuda as one option among many rather than the aspirational center. That is a different marketing posture from every market volume before it. Second, the governance lesson generalizes upward. The ADOM lesson taught this series to demand rate protection from any partner who can reprice unilaterally. Here the counterparty answers to a sovereign fund's turnaround plan, which means the pressure to monetize the program's liability comes from above the airline, from a shareholder with national objectives and a published profitability deadline. Rate protection clauses matter more against a state actor on a schedule, not less. And a treaty signed before that schedule existed deserves rereading against it. The anchor profiled, solvent because the state made it so, recovering on a stated timetable, and repricing its currency while it does. Not a reason to abandon Indonesia. A reason to stop calling it the cheapest activation on the map without saying what, exactly, is being activated. Chapter 5. The digital banks that are not the Hong Kong pattern. This series has a standing thesis about digital banks, built in the Hong Kong volume and rerun in every market since. A newly licensed bank arrives with three things: regulatory access to the interchange pool, an expensive customer acquisition problem, and no rewards currency of its own. That configuration makes it a natural counterparty for whoever holds airline treaties. It is the deficit the whole partnership grammar was designed to detect. Indonesia has the largest digital bank cohort on the belt, and it does not fit the thesis at all. Understanding why is worth a chapter, because the same failure mode will recur in other large markets, and this is the cleanest example of it I have found. The field first. Cbank, Bank Jago, Blue by BCA Digital, Bank Neocommerce, Alo Bank, Superbank, Crom, Bank Soc, Bank Raya, Hibank, Line Bank, Genius, Amer, Aladdin, Siaraya. 8 of them turned a profit in 2025. That alone distinguishes Indonesia from most digital banking markets, where profitability is a projection rather than a result. On trust and reputation, Cbank leads at 59%, ahead of Jago at 26%. Bank Neocommerce at 22%, Superbank at 14%, and Alo Bank at 11%. Now look at the ownership. This is where the thesis dies. Cbank rides Shopee's distribution. Bank Jago sits inside GoTo, which is Gojek and Tokopedia. Alo Bank channels CT Corp's retail and media footprint. The leaders are not independent entrants renting somebody else's ecosystem. They are the banking arms of ecosystems that already own the customer, already run a coin economy, and already have somewhere to put engagement. Run the 5 questions against Cbank, and the answer comes back immediately. What deficit does it have? Not customer acquisition, Shopee delivers that. Not engagement, Shopee coins do that. Not a rewards currency, it has access to one, and that currency's entire design purpose is to keep spending inside the ecosystem rather than convert it into a flight on somebody else's airplane. There is no deficit to fund, which means there is no deal. This is the super app finding from earlier volumes, wearing a banking license. And it generalizes into a rule worth stating plainly because it will save time in the volumes ahead. A digital bank is a partnership candidate when it is a bank first and an ecosystem second. It is a no-deficit giant when the order is reversed. Hong Kong's virtual banks were banks first, licensed challengers with capital and no distribution, which is precisely why U-shaped and Miles-shaped deals became available there. Indonesia's leaders are ecosystems first. The license is a feature of the ecosystem, not a business that needs a partner. 2 qualifications, because the chapter should not overreach. First, the tail is not the head. Crom, Bank Soc, Genius, Amer, Aladdin, and the smaller independents do not sit inside a super app, and some of them genuinely do have the Hong Kong configuration: a card product, a pool, a customer they must pay to acquire, and nothing aspirational to offer. They are also small, which caps what a partnership is worth. The honest read is that Indonesia offers a long tail of low-value partnership candidates, rather than the 2 or 3 high-value ones Hong Kong offered. Real, worth working, and not a thesis you would enter a market for. Second, Blue by BCA Digital is its own case. It is the digital arm of the bank whose reward BCA points already convert into KrisFlyer and GarudaMiles, as Chapter 3 documented. That makes BCA simultaneously the most interesting distribution partner in the country, and the incumbent whose existing transfer paths HeyMax would be competing with. Both hands of that relationship are real. This series has seen the shape before. in the coalition negotiations of the Canada volume. And the lesson was that a counterparty who competes with you in one product line will negotiate the other line accordingly. So, no lattice queue here, of the kind Thailand's battlefield chapter could rank. Indonesia's partnership surface is a long, shallow tail, one genuinely two-handed relationship with BCA, and a set of super app banks that this series should stop courting in every market where it finds them. The community remains, and the community is the one that will decide how any of this lands. Chapter 6, the community that already left. Every market's reception is decided by the people who write about points in that market's language. Indonesia's are further along than Thailand's, further along and considerably less happy. That combination produced the single most useful artifact I found in this entire research. It deserves the chapter. The scene first. Pinterpoint is Indonesia's leading points and miles publication. Bahasa language. Founded and written by Vincent Tan, focused on aspirational cabins and hotel programs, and the detail that matters analytically, it publishes its own points valuation tables. A community that maintains valuations is a community that has stopped taking programs at their word. On the developmental scale this series built in the American volume, that puts Indonesia past the amateur enthusiast stage and into the audit stage. Thailand sat at the earlier point, which is exactly why that volume identified an earned standing window still open. Indonesia's equivalent window is much narrower. Now the artifact itself. Pinterpoint's strategy piece for 2026 makes 4 moves, and every single one of them is a finding. Move 1. It calls 2025 a roller coaster year, with Indonesian credit card offerings and loyalty programs moving downward. That is the domestic market being marked down by its own most informed observer. Move 2. It names the Indonesian top 3, KrisFlyer, GarudaMiles, Asia Miles. Note the order and note the first entry. The leading aspiration in Indonesia is the Singapore currency. For a Singapore platform whose shelf carries KrisFlyer, that is straightforwardly favorable, and it is the strongest demand-side fact in this volume. Move 3. It says GarudaMiles has devalued and tells readers to diversify into ANA, JAL, and Flying Blue. Chapter 4 documented why. What matters here is that the community reached that conclusion independently and published it. Move 4. It recommends that Indonesians pursue American credit cards, naming specific U.S. products as substantially better than the domestic options. That last one stopped me. The considered 2026 advice of Indonesia's leading points authority to Indonesia's most sophisticated collectors is to leave the domestic system entirely, not to optimize within it, to go and get an American card. I have now written 15 market volumes, and I have not seen a community give that advice about its own market. It is a demand signal and an indictment at the same time. These people want the product this series has spent 16 volumes describing. They cannot buy it locally, and their workaround is an offshore financial product that most of them cannot actually obtain. And HeyMax is not mentioned, not recommended, not criticized, not compared, simply absent. Which brings this chapter to its real subject, the record. Chapter 3 of every market volume in this series asks what the company has actually done in the market. The answer here required a correction, and I want to make it explicitly rather than quietly. I came into this volume carrying an assumption from the Pool Atlas that Indonesia's sign-up gate has been open since inception, making it a market HeyMax had already technically entered and merely never activated. The company's own series, a communication, does not support that framing. It describes 2 operating markets, Singapore and Hong Kong, with Hong Kong named as the first international market entered in 2025. Its stated expansion is Japan, Taiwan, and Australia by the end of 2026. Indonesia is not mentioned. Neither are Malaysia, Thailand, or the Philippines, though an earlier report has the chief executive naming all 4 as launch targets. So the honest record is narrower than I expected. Indonesia has been named as an ambition and has never been claimed as a market. Whatever the sign-up gate does, an unlocked door is not an entry, and this series drew exactly that distinction in the Philippines volume. The scale figures from the same communication frame it: 150,000 users, 800 merchants, 30-plus airline and hotel programs, 500 million miles issued a year. That is a two-market business with a regional treaty rack, which reframes the question this volume has to answer. It is not why has a cheap activation produced nothing, because there was no activation. It is the same question every market volume asks. Should the company enter on the merits, given a narrow, rich pool undercut by a free rail, a devaluing anchor already on the shelf? Banks that have partially solved the problem, digital banks that do not need a partner, and a community that is sophisticated, disillusioned, and looking offshore for an answer nobody local will sell them. The Gap Hunt takes it from here. Chapter 7, The Gap Hunt. The ownership test applied to Indonesia. For each candidate vacancy, 2 questions. Is it real? And if it is real and valuable, why has nobody filled it? A gap that survives that second question is a gap. A gap that does not survive it is a place somebody already looked, priced, and walked away from. 4 candidates. Candidate 1, the aggregated currency. Not the transferable currency. Chapter 3 established that Indonesia already has partial transferability through its banks. The aggregation of it. Today, an Indonesian who wants optionality must hold multiple cards, track multiple point balances at multiple ratios, and move them separately into KrisFlyer or HeyMax or GarudaMiles within a monthly cap. Nobody sells one balance that reaches all of them at one rate on portal spend. Is that real? Yes. It is a genuine consumer problem, and the fragmentation tax is exactly what HeyMax's product removes. Now the ownership test, who could naturally fill it? The banks could widen their own rosters, and they have some incentive to. But each bank can only aggregate its own spend. The aggregation across issuers is structurally not theirs to build. The airlines will not, because an aggregator is a threat to each of them individually. The super apps could and will not, for the reasons Chapter 5 gave. So the natural owner is a platform sitting outside the issuers, holding treaties into all the destinations, which is HeyMax's shape. But the value of filling it is lower than Thailand's equivalent, and I am not going to inflate it. In Thailand, the entrant would be selling optionality to people who have none. In Indonesia, it would be selling better optionality to people who already have some. That is a convenience and rate argument rather than a possibility argument. Those 2 things sell at different prices and convert at different rates. Real gap, smaller prize. Candidate 2, portal earn. Indonesian rewards are earned on card rails, which means only on transactions a bank sees at rates a bank sets. Nobody pays Indonesians miles for shopping through a portal on top of their card. And remember Chapter 2's finding, Indonesian affiliate commissions are the richest this series has priced anywhere. Shopee at 4.25 to 10%, Tokopedia near 7 to 10, TikTok Shop reaching well beyond. So this is the most underexploited funding seam in the volume. Ownership test. The marketplaces themselves could pay in miles instead of coins, and they do not, because coins retain and miles release. Cashback sites exist, but they pay cash, which does not compound into aspiration. The affiliate networks have no consumer product at all. Natural owner, a consumer platform with treaties. Same answer as candidate 1. But this is a better gap because nothing about it is partially solved. This, not the currency seat, is Indonesia's real vacancy. Candidate 3, the coalition travel exit. Telkomsel Poin, Alfamart Poinku, Indomaret, the wallet coins, all closed, all redeeming into discounts, none offering a way out into aspiration. Structurally identical to Thailand's second candidate. The ownership test returns a partner, not an entrant. And the same sequencing applies, available after a local operation exists, not before. But note the weakening. A coalition's appetite for a travel exit depends on its members wanting one. And Indonesian coalition members are overwhelmingly the mass tier that Chapter 1 showed is outside the miles game entirely. Alphamart's shopper is not flying business class to Tokyo. This is a thinner version of the Thai deal. Candidate 4, the QR tier. QRIS is the nation's payment rail, and it is free below $30, which is where most Indonesian retail lives. Merchant-funded payment moment earn is the only architecture that reaches it. Ownership test, the same answer the Thailand and Atlas volumes gave. Whoever builds the rail with a coalition behind it. And the same sequencing rule, coalition first, then rail. So it is a Phase 2 product, not an entry wedge. But here the Phase 2 prize is bigger than Thailand's because the QR tier is bigger and the card tier is smaller. Worth flagging as the one place where Indonesia's headline population might eventually mean something. The Hunt's verdict. 2 entrant-shaped gaps, both real. The aggregated currency, discounted because it is partially solved. And portal earn, which is not solved at all and which sits on the richest commission seam on the map. 2 partnership-shaped deficits queued behind them, both thinner than Thailand's equivalents. That is a materially weaker result than Thailand's and a materially stronger one than the completed markets. Indonesia is not a vacancy waiting to be filled, and it is not a closed market. It is a partial market, which is the hardest kind to write a verdict for because the answer depends entirely on whether the arithmetic clears, rather than on whether the opportunity exists. The arithmetic is next. Chapter 8, Entry Economics. The arithmetic chapter and the one that decides this volume. Thailand's came back green on every line. Indonesia's does not, and the pattern of where it fails is far more interesting than a simple no. The funding side first, and here is the volume's best news. Can Indonesian commissions mint competitive miles? Travel runs at the invariant 10 to 25%, and Chapter 1 established that the Jakarta and Bali corridors already carry HeyMax's existing members. E-commerce runs at rates nobody else on this map matches. Shopee 4.25 to 10%, Tokopedia roughly 7 to 10, TikTok Shop typically 5 to 15 with open plan listings reaching 10 to 30. And the bounty economy runs on Chapter 2's narrow, but rich card pool. Blend those and the funding clears comfortably. In fact, it clears with more headroom than Thailand's because the commission seam here is doing work that Thailand asked interchange to do. One deduction against it. TikTok's May 2026 restructuring tiers commissions on a creator's trailing 30-day volume. So a small Indonesian operation earns at the bottom of the published band, not the top. Model the floor, not the headline. Now the competitive rate war, and this is where I have to be careful. Chapter 3 gave the incumbent rates. Here they are in dollars, at 17,814 rupiah to the dollar as of this research. A BCA Singapore Airlines co-brand, earning 1 KrisFlyer mile per 10,000 rupiah, is earning 1 mile per 56 US cents. Roughly 1 8/10 miles per dollar. That is not a weak rate, that is a rich one. Richer than the co-brand benchmarks this series found in Singapore itself. HeyMax's roughly 1 mile per dollar class does not beat it. I want that sentence in this volume without hedging. Because the temptation to compare a portal rate against a card rate and declare victory is the single most common dishonesty in this industry, and this series does not get to do it once. What saves the comparison is that it is the wrong comparison. Max miles are earned on portal spend on top of whatever the card already pays. The member does not choose between them, they stack. So the genuine Indonesian propositions are 3. Stacking, which is additive and real. 1-to-1 with no ratio table. Against a generic bank path that just devalued from 150 to 1 to 200 to 1, and against a Mandiri conversion capped at 50,000 points a month. And reach beyond the 3 programs the banks happen to serve. Those are good arguments. They are not the argument Thailand had, which was that the product did not exist at any price. One more observation on that 1.8 miles per dollar, because it is a trap. An earn rate denominated in rupiah becomes more generous in dollar terms as the rupiah weakens. The same real purchase generates more rupiah of billed spend, and therefore more miles, and the rupiah has weakened substantially. So a meaningful part of why Indonesian co-brand earn looks rich in dollars is currency drift, not issuer generosity, which makes that rate an active devaluation candidate. An entrant pricing against 1.8 miles per dollar is pricing against a number the issuers have every incentive to rebase. Now the costs. Addressed Indonesian launch needs Bahasa Indonesia throughout, rupiah display, local support, the plus 62 gate, floor assembly across the marketplace affiliate networks, community work, and a regulatory perimeter that is heavier than Thailand's. Indonesia's personal data protection law, its e-money and remittance perimeter, and a foreign platform posture that has historically pushed toward local incorporation for anything resembling stored value. Calibrating against the Thai model, which I priced at $300,000 to $500,000 for a credible first year, Indonesia costs more, not less, despite being the cheaper country. My estimate, $500,000 to $800,000 for a credible first year. The delta is driven almost entirely by the regulatory perimeter and by a merchant floor that has to be assembled across 3 competing marketplaces rather than one dominant travel vertical. And now the revenue geometry and the problem. The corridor side already runs and would deepen. The domestic side is the beachhead, and Chapter 1 sized it honestly at a low hundreds of thousands optimizer cohort at maturity. The same order of magnitude as Thailand's, from a population 4 times larger. So, a beachhead no bigger than Thailand's, against a cost base 50 to 60% higher, selling a proposition that is additive rather than unprecedented, anchored on a currency that repriced 4 times in 12 months. Every one of those is survivable alone. Together, they are the difference between a clean yes and something else. The stress tests, briefly. Rupiah volatility is a live rate risk that cuts both ways, as above, price the earn in local funding terms, and expect to rebase. The Garuda anchor is a governance question against a state actor on a published deadline, which is a harder counterparty than a commercial one. And the QRIS clock is not a clock in the Thai sense at all. The card tier here was never mass, so what would have been erosion has already happened. That last one is the only stress test Indonesia passes more comfortably than Thailand. The economics, stated once, funding clears with room, the rate war is competitive but not dominant and rests on stacking rather than on absence. The cost is higher than Thailand's. The beachhead is the same size, the anchor is depreciating. That is not a market that fails the arithmetic. It is a market where the arithmetic works and the return does not justify the sequence. Which is a different verdict, and the next chapters have to write it precisely. Chapter 9, Threats and the Partnership Ledger. The battlefield and the ledger share a chapter here, because Indonesia's partnership surface is thin enough that it does not need its own. The opportunities ranked. First and clearly, Portal Earn on the richest commission seam this series has priced. Chapter 7 found it unsolved by anyone. Chapter 8 found it funded with room. If Indonesia is ever entered, this is the wedge, not the currency, the earn. Second, the corridor, which already pays and would deepen with proper Bali and Jakarta merchandising and destination earn, at a cost of approximately nothing. Third, aggregating what the banks partially offer. Real, and discounted for being a convenience argument rather than a possibility one. Fourth, and further out, the QRIS tier, which is the one place Indonesia's headline population eventually converts into a number that matters, behind the coalition then rail sequencing rule. Now the partnership ledger, run through the 5 questions. It is shorter than any market volume so far. Bank Central Asia, the only genuinely two-handed relationship in the country. Deficit, none urgent. It is the market's strongest card franchise. Funding, not applicable in the usual direction. This is a distribution conversation, not a purchase. Governance, sound but conflicted because BCA's reward to KrisFlyer path is precisely what an aggregator competes with. Demographics, exact because BCA holds the affluent tier. Replication, limited. Grade B, with the standing caution from the Canada volume that a counterparty who competes with you in one line will negotiate the other line accordingly. The independent digital banks, Crom, Banksock, Genius, Ammer, Aladdin. Deficit, real, and it is the Hong Kong configuration. A card product, pool access and acquisition cost, and nothing aspirational to offer. Funding, fits. Governance, clean. Demographics, partial. Replication, yes, and that is the point because this is a repeatable small deal. Grade B- individually. And the honest framing is that Indonesia offers a long tail of low-value candidates, rather than the 2 or 3 high-value ones Hong Kong offered. Garuda, already signed, which removes the gate Thailand had to pass. Grade, incumbent with Chapter 4's caveat that the treaty deserves rereading against Danantara's timetable. And the declined with reasons. C-Bank, Bank Jago, Alo Bank, no deficit ecosystem banks per Chapter 5's rule. A digital bank is a candidate when it is a bank first and an ecosystem second, and these are the reverse. Shopee, Tokopedia, GoPay, OVO, DANA. Closed-loop coin economies with no aspiration deficit. Telkomsel, a real telco churn thesis in principle, sitting on a subscriber base overwhelmingly outside the Miles game. Alphamart and Indomerit, mass-tier demographics that Chapter 1 placed outside the addressable market entirely. That ledger has no keystone and no jewel. Thailand's had both. Now the threats priced. The incumbent response flank is the live one, and it runs the opposite way from Thailand's. Indonesian banks already have transfer rosters, so widening them is an incremental product decision rather than a strategic reversal. Probability moderate to high on a 2-year view. Severity moderate, it erodes the aggregation argument without touching the portal-earn one. Which is one more reason the wedge should be earn rather than breadth. The anchor flank is Chapter 4's and needs no repeating, except to note that it has already partly happened, rather than sitting in the future as Thailand's does. The rate flank is new to this volume and worth naming. The 1.8 miles per dollar co-brand benchmark is inflated by rupiah drift, so it is likely to be rebased downward. That is a threat to the incumbents and therefore an opportunity for an entrant. But it also means any competitive analysis written against today's rate has a shelf life. The super app flank is lower here than anywhere, for a reason that cuts unpleasantly. Shopee and Garuda already own banks, coins, and distribution in this market. They do not need to build a transferable currency, and if they ever wanted one, they would build it from a stronger position than any entrant could reach. Probability low. Severity, if it happened, total. And the sovereign flank, which is genuinely Indonesia-specific and has no analog anywhere in the series so far. Danantara is now a shareholder with national objectives, a published profitability deadline, and a demonstrated willingness to reprice a loyalty currency in order to serve them. Any partner economics negotiated with Garuda are negotiated, in the last instance, with the Indonesian state's turnaround plan. This series has priced regulators before. It has not previously had to price a counterparty's owner. The battlefield's shape, then. The opportunities are real, but they arrive in the wrong order. The best one, Portal Earn, is a product wedge rather than a market thesis, and it does not need a market entry to be worth building. The threats are mostly slow. Nothing here is dramatic. Which is exactly the problem, and the verdict chapter has to say so without flinching. Indonesia is not dangerous, it is not empty, and it is not urgent. Those 3 facts together are what a middle market looks like. Chapter 10, the plan if the answer were yes. Before the verdict, a discipline this series imposes on itself. Write the plan you would run, in full, before deciding whether to run it. A refusal that never costed the alternative is not an analysis, it is a preference. So here is the Indonesian plan, sequenced and gated. Phase 0, months 0 to 6. Cost, approximately nothing. Take the corridor and the product wedge and do not enter anything. 2 workstreams. Neither requires an Indonesian entity, a license, a rupiah price list, or a single local hire. First, the corridor. Bali and Jakarta merchandised properly for the members HeyMax already has. Villa and resort inventory surfaced rather than buried. Activities and transfers curated. Destination earns switched on for members physically in Indonesia. Chapter 1 established that this is current revenue running through existing rails, and Chapter 9 ranked it second among the opportunities precisely because it costs nothing. Second, and more interesting, build the portal earn wedge against Indonesian merchants without launching an Indonesian product. Chapter 7 found portal earn to be the country's only unsolved vacancy. Chapter 8 found the commission seam that funds it to be the richest on the map, and existing members already shop Shopee and Tokopedia. So a merchant floor assembled through the marketplace affiliate networks serves them today. It generates the commission data that would price a real entry. And it does all of that without touching Indonesia's regulatory perimeter. The output of Phase 0 is a demand curve and a rate table. The 2 things that would turn every estimate in Chapter 8 into a measurement. Then the gate at month 6. Proceed only if the Indonesian commission data shows the seam holding at the top of its band rather than the bottom, and only if the corridor line grows on curation alone. If either fails, stop there permanently and keep the corridor. And I want to be clear that this is not a consolation outcome. It is most of the available value at none of the cost. Phase 1, months 6 to 18. $500,000 to $800,000, the dressed entry led by earn. Dressed means what it has meant in every volume. Bahasa Indonesia throughout, rupiah display, local support hours, merchant coverage deep enough that an ordinary week produces earn. And the regulatory perimeter, properly addressed rather than skirted, Indonesia's data protection law and its stored value posture are the heaviest this series has costed. And they are the reason the number is higher than Thailand's. The proposition leads with earn, not with the shelf. That is the inversion this market requires, and Chapter 4 explained why. Garuda cannot be the aspirational center of an Indonesian pitch while it is repricing, and Chapter 3 showed the banks already reach KrisFlyer and Asia Miles anyway. So the pitch is, earn max miles on the shopping you already do, on top of the card you already hold. Then move them one-to-one into more than 20 programs with no ratio table and no monthly cap. Every clause of that is defensible against the incumbent configuration, and none of it depends on the anchor. Go to market through the audit layer. Pinterpoint's community verifies things and publishes valuations. Chapter 6 showed it is disillusioned rather than hostile, which is the most winnable posture there is. Publish rates where they can be checked. Answer the devaluation question before it is asked. Phase 2, year 2 onward, the tail and the rail. The independent digital banks worked as a repeatable small deal rather than a keystone. BCA, if the two-handed conversation can be made to work. And the QRIS tier as a genuine Phase 2 product behind the coalition then rail rule, which is where Indonesia's population finally becomes the number everyone assumed it was at the start. So what does the plan cost, and what does it buy? Phase 0, near zero, buys the corridor's margin and the data to price everything else. Phase 1, 5 to 800,000, buys a beachhead the same size as Thailand's. Phase 2 deal costs, buys the tail. Now read that sequence back, and the verdict writes itself. The cheap phase captures most of the value. The expensive phase buys a beachhead that Thailand offers more cheaply, sooner, against weaker incumbents, with an anchor that is appreciating in willingness rather than depreciating in worth. The verdict chapter has to weigh that honestly, including against the possibility that I am wrong about the size of the prize. Chapter 11, Indonesia against the series. The comparison chapter, because a verdict without a ranking is just an opinion. Recall the taxonomy this series built. Deficit markets, a structural vacancy the entrant is shaped to fill. Completed markets, the seat exists and somebody credible is sitting in it. Destroyed markets, regulation removed the funding but not the demand. Middle markets, the pool or the prize is too thin for the product to pay for itself properly. Orthogonal markets, the loyalty culture points somewhere the entrant does not go. Indonesia does not sit cleanly in any of them, which is itself the finding, so let me place it by triangulation. Against Thailand, the volume immediately before this one, the contrast is nearly line by line, and it runs against Indonesia on almost every axis. Thailand's pool is uncapped and its mass card tier formed. Indonesia's is uncapped but narrow, undercut by a free rail, and its mass tier never formed at all. Thailand's banks offer no transfer breadth, which is the vacancy. Indonesia's banks already reach KrisFlyer, Asia Miles and GarudaMiles, which shrinks that vacancy to a convenience argument. Thailand's anchor is rebuilding and selling. Indonesia's is state rescued and repriced 4 times in a year. Thailand's community sits at the earned standing window. Indonesia's is past it, publishing valuations and advising readers to buy American cards. Thailand's entry costs 3 to 500,000. Indonesia's costs 5 to 8. And both of them deliver a beachhead of the same order of magnitude. The one axis where Indonesia wins outright is funding. The commission seam is the richest this series has priced, and it does the work Thailand asks interchange to do. That is a real advantage, and it is exactly why Chapter 10's Phase 0 exists. Now against Canada, the series' canonical middle market, and this resemblance is uncomfortable and instructive. Canada's audit found a market too complete to enter and too small to matter. With one asset worth having, Aeroplan's wholesale willingness, that could be bought without entering the country. Indonesia's audit finds a market partially complete, addressable, with one asset worth having, portal earn on a rich commission seam, that can likewise be built without entering the country. The structural verdict rhymes, take the asset, skip the entry. Against the United States, no contest. That market is completed and dangerous. This one is partial and quiet. Against Brazil, the orthogonal market, Indonesia is the mirror image. Brazil had the culture, the community, no funding and no corridor. Indonesia has funding, a dense corridor, and a diluted culture. Brazil failed on reachability. Indonesia fails, if it fails, on prize size. So where does it sit? A middle market with a detachable asset. Not a deficit market, because the vacancy is partial. Not completed, because portal earn is genuinely unfilled. Not destroyed, because nothing was capped. And not orthogonal, because the corridor is excellent and the leading local aspiration is KrisFlyer, a currency HeyMax already carries. Now the counterweight. Because this chapter should argue against itself, and there are 3 things that could make me wrong about the size of the prize. 1. Indonesia is the 4th most populous country on Earth, with a young, digitally native, fast formalizing middle class. Every estimate in Chapter 1 is a snapshot of an affluent tier that is growing faster than Thailand's. A 5-year view might size the beachhead very differently from a today view, and this series has been much more comfortable pricing static markets than compounding ones. 2. The commission seam might be worth more than a wedge. If Portal Earn funds an earn-led product that never needs the anchor at all, then Chapter 4's devaluing Garuda stops being a central objection. And the whole analysis would rest on a market thesis I have partly imported from markets where interchange was the only funding route. 3. The QRIS tier is the one genuinely large prize on the map. If merchant-funded payment moment earn ever works at scale, it works here first and biggest, and a company with no Indonesian presence at that moment would be watching somebody else build it. None of those changes today's ranking. All three belong in the falsifiers. Ranked, Indonesia sits behind Thailand and behind Vietnam's prospects on the belt, ahead of every capped and completed market, and roughly level with Canada, with the difference that Canada's detachable asset was a treaty to buy and Indonesia's is a product to build. Chapter 12, The Verdict and the Falsifiers. The verdict: no on entry, yes on the wedge. Build the Indonesian earn product. Do not launch an Indonesian market. That is a conditional in shape and a refusal in substance, and I want to state both halves precisely, because a verdict that hedges is worthless. The refusal first. Do not run Phase 1. Do not spend $500,000 to $800,000 dressing an Indonesian launch in Bahasa Indonesia, with a local support desk and a regulatory perimeter. Because the beachhead at the end of it is the same size as Thailand's, and Thailand costs less, arrives sooner, faces weaker incumbents, and offers an anchor whose willingness is rising rather than a currency that repriced 4 times in a year. When the same capital buys a better market, buying the worse one is not diversification. It is a failure to choose. The yes is narrower, and it is real. Build the portal earn product against Indonesian merchants, for the members HeyMax already has. Chapter 7 found it to be the country's only unsolved vacancy. Chapter 8 found the richest commissions seam on the series map underneath it. And Chapter 10 showed it needs no Indonesian entity, no license, no rupiah price list, and no local hire. And take the corridor properly. Bali and Jakarta merchandised for members who are already flying there. That is the Canada shape, and this series should recognize it by name. Take the detachable asset. Skip the entry. Canada's asset was a treaty to buy. Indonesia's is a product to build. Both are worth having without the country attached. Here is the working compressed. The pool is rich per swipe and narrow in reach, undercut by a free public rail rather than capped by a regulator. The addressable tier is a metropolitan optimizer cohort in the low hundreds of thousands, the same order as Thailand's, from 4 times the population. The banks have already partially solved transferability, which turns the entrance pitch from a possibility argument into a convenience argument. The anchor is on the shelf already, and it is depreciating underneath it. The digital banks are ecosystems first and need no partner. The community is sophisticated, disillusioned, and advising its readers to buy foreign credit cards. Demand and indictment in a single sentence. And the one thing nobody has built, Portal Earn, does not require entering the country in order to build. Now the falsifiers, ordered by how likely I think they are. 1. The commission data. Chapter 8's funding case rests on published affiliate bans, not on measured Indonesian yields. And TikTok's tiering means a small operator earns at the floor of those bands. If Phase 0's real commission data comes back at the top of the band rather than the bottom, then the wedge is worth more than I have priced, and the entry moves from no to conditional. This is measurable within 6 months, and it is the entire reason Phase 0 exists. 2. The beachhead is bigger than I sized it. Chapter 1's estimate is a snapshot of an affluent tier that is compounding faster than Thailand's, in the 4th most populous country on Earth. If Indonesia's optimizer cohort is growing at a rate that makes it several times Thailand's within 5 years, then entering late costs more than entering now, and this verdict is a timing error rather than a judgment. I have priced this market as static. That is the assumption I am least confident about. 3. An earn-led product does not need the anchor. Much of my objection roots through Garuda's devaluation. If a product funded by commissions and led by Portal Earn genuinely never needs the flag carrier as its aspirational center, then Chapter 4's objection weakens considerably, and the case rests only on prize size. Watch whether the Phase 0 wedge converts members without any Indonesian anchor messaging at all. 4. The banks widen. If BCA, Mandiri, or UOB add materially to their transfer rosters and lift their caps, the aggregation gap closes further and even the conditional narrows. Probability moderate. This one strengthens the refusal rather than overturning it. 5. QRIS earn work somewhere. If merchant-funded payment moment earn is ever proven at scale in any market, Indonesia becomes the largest prize for it on Earth, and the calculus inverts entirely. The country's population finally becomes the number every slide assumed it was. Probability low on a 3-year view. Severity total. That is the one that would make me wrong in the most expensive direction. 5 falsifiers, and note what distinguishes them from Thailand's. 2 of Thailand's could be resolved by a single conversation. None of Indonesia's can. They resolve by measurement over quarters. Which is exactly why the recommendation is to run the cheap phase that generates the measurements, and to decline the expensive one until they arrive. Indonesia is the largest market this series has told HeyMax not to enter, and the first it has told them to build for anyway. Take the earn, take the corridor. Leave the flag planting for a market that has earned it, which, as it happens, is the one in the previous volume.